I'm sorry this video took so long to come out, but as my most controversial Xeno game, I wanted to thoroughly play this game through and through to truly appreciate what it had to offer. When I first played this game back in 2015, I didn't think very highly of it. After really enjoying my experience with the first Xenoblade game, I was thoroughly disappointed with this game. In fact, some of my oldest videos on this channel are me of expressing just how much I do not like this game. However, that was 3 years ago, and my library of games has grown tenfold since then. Finally coming back to this game, has my opinion changed? Let's find out as I look back on 2015's Xenoblade Chronicles X. With Xenoblade Chronicles being a major success, it was pretty clear to the team at Monolith Soft that they were onto a winning formula. After the development of Xenoblade Chronicles came to an end, Xeno series creator Tetsuya Takahashi would soon get to work on a new game which would make use of the first game's systems. He would bring forward the concept with Nintendo in 2011, who were all too happy to support the project after the success of Monolith Soft's first Xenoblade game. Nintendo suggested that Monolith Soft should develop the game for their upcoming home console, the Wii U, which will be releasing late next year. Since the Wii U was a HD console, the new Xenoblade game's development would be a grand task, as the studio had never developed a HD game before. To streamline the development, several series veterans would return to lend their expertise to the game's development. Core Kojima would again direct the game, and he would again be supported by Nintendo's Genkei Yokota. Kunihiko Tanaka and Koichi Mijutani would also return from the Xenosaga trilogy to design the characters. And finally, Takahashi would write the main story, along with the returning Yurichio Takeda. Despite most of the original team coming back, the new game's development would be off to a rocky start, with the team taking almost half a year to concept the game. Takahashi wanted to distance the new game from the previous one, along with giving it a sci-fi setting more akin to Xenosaga. The result of these initial delays prevented the game from being an early Wii U title, and would see the game released in the later part of the console's life. With the initial planning out of the way, the team's focus would soon turn to the in-game world. The initial plans were to set the game over multiple worlds in a similar manner to games like Knights of the Old Republic. This was later discarded due to fears of stretching the game's content thin, and thus the game would be set on a single planet with 5 distinct continents. However, these continents would be huge, with the entire map of the original Xenoblade fitting entirely in just one of them. Not only that, they would form a singular continuous map which could be traversed without any loading screens. With the scale of the game becoming quickly apparent, additional help was brought on so that the game could meet its deadline. In the arts department, Takeda and Mijutani would soon be joined by a myriad of talent, including Yasushi Suzuki of Sin and Punishment fame, Yokota Tsukumoko, who worked on several Armored Core games, Takayuki Yanase, who had previously worked on animes like Ghost in the Shell Rise and the game Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, and Hideyuki Matsumoto, who had worked on a myriad of titles, including the first 2 Xenosaga games. Along with this, additional artwork was outsourced to Kusanagi, an anime company renowned for its background works. The result of having all these artists would be a very diverse world of different looking creatures and structures. The player's home base of New Los Angeles would be chosen by Takahashi due to his interest in the city. Initially, Takahashi wanted to base the game's hub on New York. However, budget constraints would prevent the inclusion of the giant skyscrapers that make up the Big Apple's skyline. Takahashi wanted to keep the basic Xenoblade battle system while also bringing back the mechs from games prior. The new battle system would be a lot faster than that of the previous game, to give off more of a sense of action. Along with this, the healer class would be dropped because Takahashi believed that players didn't particularly like the class. I wonder why. Instead, a new soul voice system was installed to allow the party to heal. The new Xenoblade game would be tailored towards hardcore players in a way previous Xeno games have not, with a lot more stats and functions being available to the player. This would later be supplemented by the addition of online features. Due to Monolith Soft's inexperience with online gameplay, the game's online features would be rather rudimentary and would not see the game go fully MMORPG, instead limiting the player's interactions to singular missions and group tasks, which the player could complete independently at their discretion. Due to the late inclusion of online gameplay, the game's story had to be altered drastically. Initially, the game had a narrative structure very similar to that of Xeno games prior, with the main protagonist with his own narrative. However, with the introduction of online play, Takahashi and Takeda would rework the story to centre around a player avatar, scrapping the game's original protagonist, as well as several secondary characters. Along with this, the game would see a large reduction in the philosophical elements that had been present in previous Xeno game stories. Despite the removal of several of the main story elements, the game's final script would still be very large. To assist with the completing of the massive script, Takahashi and Takeda would bring on Kazuho Hyodo, a sci-fi writer who had previously worked on the Gundam series. Hyodo would help in fleshing out the side content as well as developing the female characters, which Takeda struggled with. Despite being the first video game he ever worked on, Hyodo was given a lot of freedom in developing scenarios and was able to add additional characters at his discretion when the script required it. The final product would end up being so huge that the team would struggle to put the game on the Wii U's 32GB disc. For the physical version of the game, Monolith would offer free data packs which could be downloaded off the Wii U's eShop to speed up the game's load times. The size of the game was so huge that it almost gave then Nintendo President Satoru Iwata a heart attack when he saw the testing fees from the in-house playtesting group. The game would first be teased at Nintendo's E3 press conference in 2013 under the working title X. It was also around this time that I had just got into the series after playing through the first Xenoblade. The game's full name of Xenoblade Chronicles X would be revealed along with the game's first full trailer in 2014's E3 press conference, which also happened to be the first E3 press conference I ever watched. The game would release in Japan in April 2015, with a Western release coming later in December. The game's localization would not be handled by Nintendo of Europe, but instead by Nintendo Treehouse and 8-4. Close to the Western release of the game, a controversy would occur when it was found out that certain changes were applied to the game by the localization team. This included the removal of a customizable bust size on the female protagonist, and additional clothing on the 13-year-old Lin's bikini outfits. This censorship would generate a lot of talk online due to it being the latest of a series of recent Nintendo games to have changes in localization. Regardless of this, I was hyped for the game. Not only was it a sequel to one of the greatest games of all time, but it'd also be a solid single-player title for my Wii U, as most of the titles I owned at the time were multiplayer games. In the lead up to the game, I bought a hacked PS2 so I can port a copy of the Xenosaga trilogy from Canada and experience the previous games, before diving into the newest entry. Looking back on it now, this might have been a bad idea, as it gave me the expectation that the new game would have a story comparable to those of the past games. Oh boy, was I wrong. The story begins with another recount. This time, rather than two titans, it's two powerful alien forces which are clashing with each other right above Earth. Due to the power of the aliens' weapons, the Earth is destroyed as a result of the crossfire, but not before a series of Ark ships are able to escape the planet. One of these escaping Ark ships is the White Whale, an American ship which spends 2 years drifting through space looking for a new planet to settle. The White Whale is eventually forced to crash land on the planet Mira after it is attacked by one of the alien factions from the Earth battle. While the ship itself disintegrates upon re-entry, it is successful in dropping off its habitation ring containing the city of New Los Angeles, which lands safely on the planet's surface. 2 months later, your character is found in a status pod which jettisoned from the White Whale during re-entry. Upon coming out of status, you are introduced to Elma, the woman who found you. Elma introduces herself, but upon asking who you are, you realise that you have lost your memory. Hoping that your memories might come back, Elma leads you back to New Los Angeles, or NLA. But on the way, you soon find yourself face to face with the native creatures of Mira, and you quickly learn that you need to fight if you want to survive on this planet. You eventually make it to New Los Angeles, where you meet Elma's comrades, Irina and Gwyn. You get into a small introductory conversation before setting off on a mission. Soon afterwards, you see a large flying mech called a Skell crash land nearby as a man climbs out of the wreckage. He is soon joined by a 13-year-old girl who rushes to the scene in a car. You and Elma walk over to see what's happening. The pilot and the girl are assessing the crash when they notice you and Elma. The man introduces himself as Doug, and the girl introduces herself as Lynn. Lynn, to Doug's annoyance, abandons him to clean up the crash while she joins you and Elma to give you a tour of the city, eventually ending at the barracks. At the barracks, you meet Nagi, the former captain of the White Whale, and now Secretary of Defense. The four then enter the barracks where Nagi explains to you the purpose of the Blade operations. Blade stands for Builders of a Legacy after the destruction of Earth. Stupid, yes, I know, but I had to justify the title of the game somehow. Blade is a paramilitary force formed in the aftermath of the White Whale crash in order to establish humanity in their new home. Blade is also responsible for finding the Lifehold, a status chamber that contains the majority of the passengers that were on the ship. After giving you a tour of the Blade HQ, Nagi requests you join Blade, and by request, I mean blackmails you into joining. After attempting to say no 100 times, you are given your first mission to plant data probes. Along the way you encounter a tyrant, a powerful indigenous creature who falls reasonably easy despite all the talk leading up to it. You then plant the probe and go back to base. Your second task is to find a team that has gone missing. You make your way to their last point of contact where you find their crashed skell. Your team is surprised to see weapon damage on the craft and are soon confronted by 3 alien lifeforms. They introduce themselves as the Prone. However, upon attempting negotiations, the Prone decide to attack your team. Your team is successful in defeating the Prone, and you make your way to their nearby base. There you find the missing team, who are already dead. After defeating the base's leader, the trio attempt to make their escape, but not before running into a Noppon called Tatsu. Tatsu reveals that he is a native Miran, and thanks the party for fighting off the Prone who were going to eat him thinking that he was a vegetable. This also begins a running joke that absolutely no one likes. Back at base you introduce Tatsu to Van Damme, who allows Tatsu to stay in LA and help your team out. Somehow. After completing a couple of side quests, you are then tasked with tracking down a piece of the lifehold, which is landed far to the west. You journey out westward where you meet Lau and his team, who are also planting data probes. Lau introduces himself as Elmer explains the situation. Lau offers to join and the four make their way towards the piece of the lifehold. On approach to the spot, the four run into an alien called El, who turns out to be friendly and has learned English by studying the data found in the piece of the lifehold. El introduces himself to the party and explains that the site where the piece was located has been taken over by the aliens. The group then rush to the site where they see the Prone destroying the lifehold part. The trio attempt to stop them, but they are too late as the lifehold part explodes. From the flames of the rubble, another alien appears, calling herself Goetia. She reveals that she and the Prone are part of a group called the Ganglion, and attempts to kill the party but are defeated. Suddenly, a mech shows up and escapes with Goetia on board. Emma suddenly realises that she has seen the mech before, and the group return to base. Back at base, the group get permission for El to stay in NLA, while at the same time giving their report. Van Damme and Nagi are upset that the lifehold part was destroyed, but Elmer reveals more disturbing news. Showing footage of their encounter alongside footage of the Battle of Earth, the group realise that the Ganglion were one of the 2 factions which fought at the battle and are now a mirror to finish off what remains of humanity. From there the story is basically look for the lifehold while fighting off different Ganglion bosses. Sorry if you're expecting something more deeper, but that's the kind of game this is. If you really want to find out what happens next, you will either need to read the plot summary or just watch the cutscenes. In the meantime, let's get on to... On the surface, Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X look like very similar games, both in navigation and combat. However, they are very different games. Well, Xenoblade Chronicles is a story-driven JRPG which will see you travel the world on a quest. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a mission-based JRPG which will see you take on tasks from a central hub, similar to games like Etrian Odyssey and God Eater. Much like with God Eater, you initially need to make a custom character. Options range from a series of male and female facial templates, with further customization on their hair and skin colour. Not the most advanced customization, but not too basic either. Along with designing your character's looks, you also need to give them a voice to use in battle. Voices range from a myriad of talent, including Adam Howden and Karina Reeves, the voices of Shulk and Fiora respectively. Once you've created your character, you are then thrown into the game's world of Mira, and oh boy what a world. Mira consists of 5 continents, with each being themed around a different environment. First you have is Primordia, which consists of grassy plains and is also the location of NLA. Second is Noctilum, the jungle continent. Third is Oblivia, the desert continent. Fourth is Silverlum, the ice continent. And last but not least is Koldros, the volcanic continent. Mira is big, and I mean really big. At 400 square kilometers, it is still one of the largest open world games ever made. To be able to navigate Mira effectively, Xenoblade Chronicles X offers a lot more freedom in movement. For one, the characters now have the ability to sprint to cover ground fast. They also have a much higher jump, which allows them to get over ledges and up rocky cliffs. As I said before, the entire world is one big map, with no loading screens, allowing you to continuously run from one side of the map to the other. Journeying around with you will be a cast of fellow Blade allies. Xenoblade Chronicles X has a whopping 19 playable characters, making it the largest cast size in a Xeno game. The game also allows up to 4 characters to be in the party at one time, as opposed to the usual 3. However, this is where I have to bring forward my first problem with the game outside of the story. Problem 1. For a series built around its stories and characters, they really dropped the ball here. I've already expressed my disinterest in the main story, however the characters are a whole nother can of worms. Perhaps that being too harsh, the majority of the characters are fine, but the While I don't think characters like Arena and Gwyn are on the same level as Shulk and Xion, they're still fine characters. The characters I have a real problem with are the main characters. Elma is super wooden and spends the whole game making generic speeches about how humanity should just all get along with each other. Lyn just comes across as an annoying spoiled child and will never stop making that stupid lame joke about eating Tatsu. And speaking about Tatsu, he is just the worst, and he's not even playable. I wouldn't have too much of a problem with these 3 characters if they weren't forced to be in your party for most of the game's main quests. In reality, these are the only 3 main characters, and the other 16 are just side characters that you can use when you're not doing the main story. Recruiting the characters is also kind of annoying, as unlike other JRPGs which you can simply switch characters out in a menu, in Xenoblade Chronicles X you need to find the character, talk to them, and then bring them into your party. This can make recruiting quite a chore when you can't remember where the character you want is located. Along with the 19 playable characters, you also meet a whole range of alien species, from the hostile Ganglion to the mercantile Nopon, who returned from the previous game. Surprisingly, for a series whose name is derived from the term for alien, this is actually the first time we've seen actual aliens in a Xeno game. The sheer number of different races can be a bit overwhelming when you compare it with the 4 races of Xenoblade Chronicles. As a result, I do feel like the quality of the alien design suffers a lot, with a lot of them feeling quite one-dimensional, with specific character traits, like the Manon being techie and the Prone being dumb brutes. New Los Angeles represents your base in which all exploration is conducted from. From here, you can buy equipment as well as get missions and reorganise your party. This is where I have to raise my second issue with the game, and it's not NLA's music, we'll come back to that later. It's the fact that New Los Angeles is based on a real life city. Problem 2. From the giant USA label on the outside to the shopping streets lifted straight out of the City of Angels, for a series built around its crazy fantastical environments, walking around a real life city just feels off. This is made more apparent by the industrial areas of the city, with their sci-fi flair clashing with the urban environments. Your main goal in NLA is to take on missions which will see you traverse the continents of Mira and complete tasks from killing monsters to finding collectibles, to some quite unique quests such as testing out new weaponry in battle. Missions come in a variety of forms. First up you have the story missions. These are the 12 missions that make up the game's main story, and which see you take on tasks which relate to the game's main narrative. Affinity missions. These are similar to the previous game's Heart to Hearts, but they are now full missions which will develop the personalities of the partaking characters. Normal missions. These are the basic side quests from the previous game, which will see you attempt to find someone in trouble and help them out. Basic missions. These are simple quests that can be taken on from the game's mission console. They involve the completion of a single task for a quick reward. Note, some basic missions are just prompts for you to take on another type of mission. To help with the completion of missions, Xenoblade Chronicles X makes solid use of the Wii U's gamepad, using it as a map of the world split into hexagonal blocks. Each block will be identified by a symbol which will show it's in that area, from treasures to tyrants. One of the most important blocks are those that contain Frontier Nav probe sites. These are indicated by a glowing beam of light where the player can drop a probe. These probes have multiple purposes, from being quick travel locations to automatically mining resources. Throughout the game, you also gain a special variety of data probes which can be switched around on the touchscreen to maximise the use of Frontier Nav. These can range from maximising Frontier Nav for a cash income to infield battle buffs which will take effect when you're in proximity of the probe. The probes can also be set to collect Moranium, a special resource used in the manufacturing of gear. Your character's equipped gear comes from a myriad of arm manufacturers, or AMs. You initially have access to 2 AMs at the start of the game, but will soon expand to a total of 8 different corporations. These AM's range of armour and weapons will initially be quite small, but can later be expanded by donating Moranium to them. Much like with the previous game, equipping armour will change your character's appearance. However, unlike in previous games, the armour will appear the same on every character, with only slight differences between the male and female models. Due to the fact that you will have a myriad of armour combinations, to prevent your characters looking hideous, Xenoblade Chronicles also introduces the ability to use armour as cosmetic fashion gear. Along with improving your character's base stats, equipped gear will also have additional bonuses called augments, such as increased damage against select enemies. Along with the fixed bonuses, certain gear will also have slots for additional augments that can be found and manufactured like gems in the previous game. However, there's no gem crafting this time, thank goodness. Gear can also be improved for additional open slots, as well as have its fixed augments improved using Moranium and Collectibles. Collectibles make their return from the previous game practically unchanged. Collectibles are still picked up as blue orbs scattered across the land and can again be recorded in the Collectopedia. However, this brings forward another problem. Problem 3. Finding collectibles is asinine. Having only 5 regions compared with the 20 of the previous game, means that the area of search required to find that specific quest's collectible is much larger. If this is not annoying enough, certain collectibles can only be found at certain locations, such as caves or around lakes, and the game does not tell you this. A quest will simply say, find 4 blanks in Oblivia, leaving you wandering aimlessly around the continent unknown to the fact that you need to go to a specific cave on the north coast. Let me just say, thank goodness for the Xenoblade Chronicles wiki. If you're lucky enough to find the collectible and complete the quest, you'll be awarded division points. These are earned by completing quests and will go to increasing your blade level. Increasing your blade level will open up more basic missions, as well as improve your field skills. Field skills let you extract items from treasure sites across Mira. These come in 3 forms: mechanical, which is used for planting probes and excavating white whale wreckage, archaeological, which is used for examining alien structures, and biological, which is used for studying plants and other stationary life forms. After what feels like an eternity, you will eventually be given a scale, which completely changes navigation, as scales can move a lot faster and jump much higher. Scales also have a vehicle form, allowing them to traverse the map in record time, and will eventually unlock the ability to fly, making navigation a breeze. As the series built around mech gameplay, it's very nice to see the mechs return to the series, and I do wish they'd be incorporated into the main Xenoblade games. To wrap up the presentation section, it's about time I talk about Xenoblade Chronicles X's most unique feature, its online play. While you, for the most part, can't directly interact with other players, the game does allow for several forms of indirect interaction with other players of Xenoblade Chronicles X. When you start a play session, you have the choice to join one of 3 squads. The first is the Lifehold squad, which is designed for single play. The second is the Conquest squad, for those who want to experience the online play, and the final is the Friend squad, which will try to pair you up in a squad containing one of your friends. Other squad members will then appear as NPCs in your world who can offer assistance, either with buffs or by temporarily joining your party as playable characters. Along with this, tasks will appear in the bottom right corner of the screen, such as kill X number of enemies or collect X number of these items. These tasks can be completed by anyone in the squad, and the whole squad will be rewarded for their completion via reward tickets. These tickets can be exchanged back in New Los Angeles for materials, which can be seriously helpful in the completion of certain missions or the manufacturing of gear and augments. Along with indirectly interacting with other players, you can also take on specific online missions with other players. However, I'll talk about those in more detail in... Much like with the presentation, on the surface, Xenoblade Chronicles X combat looks very similar to that of the previous game, with the characters engaging the enemy in the overworld, attacking them automatically, with the option of using additional arts via a bar on the bottom of the screen. However, it too has had major changes applied to it that go well beyond the new look of the UI. As I said earlier, the battle party now consists of 4 members, in which you control one while the AI controls the other 3. While you can play anyone in the party, I normally stick to the avatar. Characters now wield 2 weapons, a blade and a gun, which they can switch between on the fly. The type of blade and gun the character can use is determined by their class. My personal favourite is the Galactic Knight, who can use a lightsaber and drones, but today I'm trying out the Mastermind, wielding a knife and laser gun. The classes are progressively unlocked through a class tree, in which you can get a maxed out level 4 class pretty quickly. I'm not sure if the game wants you to switch around with the classes, because for the most part I just stuck with the one I originally chose. It's through the classes that the characters learn arts and skills. Arts work in a similar fashion to how they did in the last game, however they are now tied to one of the 2 specific weapons. If an art is used while the wrong weapon is in use, the character will automatically switch weapons to use the art. If an art is fully charged while the character wields the art's weapon, the art will build up a second charge. An art with a secondary charge will yield extra effects such as increased damage and additional tension points. Tension points, or TP, is this game's equivalent to the party gauge. It is primarily gained via auto attacks as well as through certain arts. Certain arts will require the use of 1000 TP to function, and thus it's important to build up TP via auto attacks. With 3000 TP, the player will have the ability to revive a down player as well as enter an overdrive state, which is this game's equivalent to chain attacks. In overdrive, the character will experience major buffs to their combat performance, as well as drastically reduce the cooldown of arts and allowing them to gain a tertiary charge for even greater effect. When in overdrive, the character will have a counter, which will net the player bonuses such as more damage and experience depending on the colour and the number inside. The counter will change colour and increase in value depending on what arts are used, but the specifics of this are really confusing, and it would probably make more sense if I experimented around with overlimit. However, problem 4. TP gain is way too slow. When a third of your arts require 1000 TP, Not being able to use such art until you've auto-attacked an enemy 8 times is really annoying, and that's including my weapon's TP Gain Plus ability. While some classes have decent TP building arts, others do not. And the fact that you need 3000 TP to revive someone basically makes a knockout a death blow because there is no way your allies are going to build up enough TP for a revival. There's a reason I was happy Xenosaga Episode 2 abandoned the individual boost gauge from Episode 1, because independent gauges take too long to fill, and 3000 TP is just too much for a revival. Imagine Xenoblade Chronicles requiring 3 charges of the party gauge to revive any party member. Reviving would be impossible. The game does offer another way to build TP via soul voices. During the fights, characters will occasionally trigger soul voices in which they will shout out to request the party use a specific art. If another player in the party uses the art, they will get a bonus, such as increased damage or additional TP. The triggers and art bonuses can be customized in your avatar, and as you might expect, I put as many as I could towards TP gaining bonuses. A surefire way to trigger a soul voice is to destroy an appendage. Most enemies in the game will have several appendages that can be specifically targeted along with the main enemy. Destroying an appendage will disable certain enemy attacks, as well as net you additional material drops once the fight is over, but you'll still need to watch out if you're piloting a scale, as you can have your own appendages destroyed in battle. Speaking of scales, much like the mechs in the previous game, scales have a couple of differences compared with foot battles. For one, scale arts are determined by the scale's equipped weapon and are not learnt. Scales also have to manage a fuel gauge like they did in Xenogears, with arts costing fuel to use. If one of these arts staggers the enemy, the scale can then bind it, encasing it in its sphere, leaving them paralysed. This will last for 10 seconds, or until the player fails one of the quick time prompts. If the player is lucky, they might trigger a cockpit time, which will temporarily move the camera inside the scale's cockpit, and arts will all be taken off cooldown. The chance of this happening is greatly increased when the scale enters overdrive. Scales build up gear points, or GP, instead of TP. Unlike TP, GP is only used for overdrive. Scale's overdrive is a much simpler affair than the foot ones, simply giving buffs to the scale and increasing cockpit time occurring. This combined with the pure strength of scale arts makes scales extremely powerful, and this can be a problem. Problem 5. Scales are way too powerful. Perhaps this is why they became available so late in the game, because once you get one, outside of the few situations where they can't be used, you should nearly always be in a scale when in battle. Unlike Xenogears, which naturally balance mech and foot gameplay, Xenoblade Chronicles X seems to want you to be in the scale 24/7, as literally every task becomes easier once you're inside one. This in turn creates a strategy of seeking out small high-level enemies of which the scale can crush for tons of experience, as small enemies do not have much health, but still yield massive amounts of experience because there are so many levels above you. This also brings forward a problem of level scaling. Since Xenoblade Chronicles X is open world, that means you can go anywhere from the start of the game. This is a major problem for enemy level scaling, as unlike a linear JRPG, you can't just make the enemies get stronger in the next area you go, as you don't know how the characters will approach the world. The result of this will be areas of enemies way too strong for you and others where they are way too weak. I also hate the missions where you sneak around a fort of level 50 enemies only to fight a level 20 boss. If the random enemies' levels are annoying you, you can always try out online missions with other players. Online missions are divided into 3 categories: squad missions, time attacks, and nemesis battles. Squad missions will see the player team up with 4 other players to complete a task, while in time attacks the player will go solo to complete missions at the best time, relative to other players. Meanwhile, nemesis battles are a special type of squad mission that will only become available once a certain number of squad tasks have been completed. This will see you fight the game's toughest enemies for massive rewards. But enough about the battles, let's talk about the soundtrack. It seems Takahashi really likes his anime composers, this time getting renowned composer Hiroyuki Sawano to compose the soundtrack to the game. Sawano is probably best known for his work on Attack on Titan and Kill la Kill, and brings his usual flair to Xenoblade Chronicles X, with heavy use of synthesized sounds and vocal tracks, with lyrics that make no sense. As a big fan of his music, Takahashi gave Sawano a lot of freedom when it came to composing the music. The end result of this is a very unique soundtrack. The game does have some pretty good tracks, especially in the area themes, credit to Noctilum and Oblivia. However, problem 6, the game also has some tracks that are downright terrible. Who listened to the NLA Light theme and thought, yeah, now that's quality music? The game's regular battle themes are also pretty bad, with their use of really cringy lyrics, which were quickly turned into memes. However, at the end of the day, the soundtrack simply exists in the background to supply ambience for the game, right? Let's talk about the game's sound mixing. Problem 7. While no previous Xeno game had the option to adjust the sound levels, they, for the most part, handled the mixing pretty well. Xenoblade Chronicles X, on the other hand, frequently has the music so loud that if it was not for the game's subtitles, you would have no idea what the characters are saying, as you physically cannot hear them. This also applies to the game's sound design. I haven't really talked about sound effects in these retrospectives, but when it comes to an action game, sound design is critical. However, I again feel like the game has dropped the ball here. Unlike in Xenoblade Chronicles, I really have trouble in battles when it comes to getting the feeling that I am dealing or taking damage, and a lot of that comes down to the sound effects. I have frequently died for what feels like no reason, as the game's sound effects fail to indicate that I was taking damage. I would like to say that the game brings it all back around with the ending song, but unfortunately that's not the case. When you have a soundtrack with a ton of vocal pieces, it's hard for the song Your Voice to stick out as the game's ending song. Sung by Japanese vocalist Mika Kobayashi, who had previously worked with Swano and other works, the song's alright, but nothing special compared with other vocal themes in the game, yet alone the whole series. At the end of the day, Xenoblade Chronicles X soundtrack is a mixed bag, much like the case with the first two Xenosaga games. But at least we got that awesome final boss theme. I remember being quite disappointed with Xenoblade Chronicles X back when it came out in 2015. After getting really invested into the Xeno series' deep story and interesting protagonists/villains, this game's lackluster story with wooden protagonists and one-dimensional villains really turned me off from the series and Nintendo as a whole. The following year I would play Fire Emblem Fates, another Nintendo published game, which seemed to abandon the core series staples for a focus on the previous game's new gimmicks. This led me to lose a lot of faith in the big end as a whole, and I wouldn't really start appreciating Nintendo games until the Switch launched in early 2017. However, those gimmicks in Xenoblade Chronicles X were built around a giant open world, with lots of customization options, hardly anywhere near as controversial as what Fate's pair-up and child mechanics were. Looking back at this game as more of a spin-off than a main series title has done a lot to make me appreciate what this game has to offer. So, do I now love Xenoblade Chronicles X, realising that it's one of, if not the best game in the series? No. Even back in my top 3 worst Xeno games video, I said it was a good game, just a bad Xeno game, and my opinion on that hasn't changed. What has changed is my view on this game as a bad Xeno game to a very well done Wii U game that should be a must-own for anyone looking to sink a ton of hours into a solid single-player title on the system. So, looking at Xenoblade Chronicles X as a standalone game, do I now rank it higher than the other games in the series? Again, no. Looking at this game without the lens of the Xeno series, I have to say this game is definitely better than both Xenogears and the first two Xenosagas when it comes to gameplay, even if I do believe some gameplay aspects are handled better in one over the other. Comparing with the others is a bit more complicated. On one hand, content-wise, Xenoblade Chronicles X destroys the competition, but just having more stuff doesn't make the game better. The game is majorly flawed, and these flaws don't simply come from the style of game Xenoblade Chronicles is. The God Eater series has a very similar mission structure gameplay, but it still delivers an interesting cast of characters with less broken gameplay and a more reliable soundtrack to boot. And it's for these reasons why I don't put Xenoblade Chronicles X in the same tier as the top Xeno games like Xenosaga Episode 3 and Xenoblade Chronicles. In researching for this video, I found a lot of YouTubers praising this game as the best game in the series, and initially I was like, seriously, have you not played any of the other games in the series? And I would cringe every time they praised the story or characters. However, coming back to this game, I can see why a lot of people would like this game over the other games in the series. For one, its simpler story isn't a roadblock to enjoying the game, unlike the case with the other games in the series. And it offers a level of customization that is simply just not found in any of the other Xeno games. However, as for me, I'll be sticking with the main series, and what do you know, only 2 years after Xenoblade Chronicles X came out, we would return to the main series with a true sequel to the original Xenoblade. So come back next time as I look at 2017 Xenoblade Chronicles 2.